Imagine you've just filled your food stores for winter. The meat is drying, the nuts are gathered. You did everything right. Then the sky changes. Not a passing shower, a slow, gray, heavy system that settles in and doesn't move. It rains through the first day, then the second. By the third day, the smoke hole in your shelter is the only dry air left. By the fifth day, your firewood pile, the one you thought would last 2 weeks, is already half gone, and it's still raining. You're not just wet anymore, you're running out of time. For most of human history, a single rainstorm was dangerous. A week of it was something else entirely. It wasn't weather anymore, it was a test of everything the group had built. Today, a week of rain means you reschedule a hike. Maybe you complain about it twice on your way to the car. For a human being 30,000 years ago, 7 straight days of rain could unravel a group's entire season, and in some cases, end it. Here's what actually happens to a group trapped for a week, one problem stacking on the next. The first thing that fails is dry wood. Everyone assumes fire is simple. Find wood, light it, done. But dry wood is a finite resource, and a week of rain empties it fast. Groups had to go further each day to find anything usable, splitting open soaked logs for the dry heartwood inside, stripping bark from birch trees because it contains a compound called betulin that burns even when wet. Every extra hour spent searching for fuel was an hour not spent doing anything else. And if the wood ran out before the rain did, the fire went out. And for most of human history, once it was out, it might stay out. The second thing that fails is food. A week without hunting isn't a missed meal, it's a real shortage. Fresh tracks wash away within hours in heavy rain, so even if someone was willing to risk the open ground, there was nothing to follow. Stored food had to be rationed carefully because nobody knew if the rain would stop in 1 more day or 5. Archaeologists studying hunter-gatherer groups have found that food sharing and rationing behavior intensifies almost immediately once a group traps a week. The group starts eating like the emergency might not end soon, because it might not. And the third thing that fails, slowly and quietly, is people. This is the part almost nobody talks about. A week is long enough for boredom to turn into something closer to conflict. 15 to 30 people confined to one dry space, day after day, with no privacy and no escape. Anthropologists who study small group dynamics call this confinement stress, and it shows up in every isolated human environment we've ever studied, from Antarctic research stations to submarine crews. Ancient humans didn't have a name for it, but the archaeological record suggests they understood the danger of it instinctively because of what they did to prevent it. They gave everyone a job. At sites where evidence of week-long shelter use has been found, archaeologists don't just find one kind of tool debris. They find several, clustered in different spots around the same fire, meaning multiple people were working on different tasks at the same time, in parallel for hours. One area shows stone-flaking debris, another shows ochre residue, another shows tiny bone fragments consistent with needle-making. This wasn't chaos, it was organization. A trapped group didn't just wait out the rain, it assigned itself work, the same way a ship's crew assigns watches. Now here's where it gets interesting. That make work wasn't busy work. It was some of the most important technology humans ever produced. Bone needles, dated to roughly 60,000 years ago in southern Africa, required total stillness to make. A single wrong pressure and the eye of the needle cracks. You don't make one of these on a day when you're moving camp or tracking prey. You make it on a day when there's nothing else to do but sit and focus. The same is true for cordage. At a Neanderthal site in France, archaeologists recovered a fragment of twisted plat fiber string tens of thousands of years old, the oldest direct evidence of rope making we have. Twisting fiber into cord is slow, repetitive, and mind-numbingly patient work. It is, in other words, exactly what a week of rain produces in abundance: time. And it wasn't only tools. Shelters themselves were rebuilt during these stretches. Bedding made from layered grasses and rushes has been found in South African caves dating back over 70,000 years, with insect-repellent leaves deliberately placed on top, and evidence that this bedding was periodically burned and replaced, meaning someone was managing hygiene inside a confined shelter across many days, not just one. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expects, because somewhere in these long, wet, confined stretches, something else happened that had nothing to do with survival at all: art. The oldest known cave paintings, some over 40,000 years old, aren't found near cave entrances where you'd naturally shelter from rain. They're deep inside, through narrow crawl spaces, in total darkness, reachable only by carrying a flame the whole way. Nobody does that when the hunting is good and the weather is clear. You do that when you have already made every tool you can make, mended everything you can mend, and there are still days of rain left to sit through. A week of rain doesn't just produce boredom, it produces the specific kind of boredom that becomes invention. And it wasn't just objects being made, it was stories. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups have found that daytime conversation is almost entirely practical, where to find water, which plants are safe. But nighttime, fireside conversation shifts dramatically toward myth, storytelling, and shared history. A multi-day rain event doesn't just extend the evening fire conversation, it turns it into the only conversation there is for days at a time. And some of the oldest, verified oral traditions in the world, Aboriginal Australian stories describing coastline changes from roughly 7,000 years ago, survived purely because groups spent enormous, repeated stretches of time doing nothing but retelling them. A week of rain wasn't dead time, it was concentrated transmission time, the closest thing ancient humans had to an uninterrupted classroom. And here's the part that flips the whole story. A week of rain wasn't only a threat, it was also a reset. When the rain finally broke, the ground held tracks better than it had in weeks, soft, deep, unmistakable. Water pooled in natural rock basins, some of which show signs of being deliberately deepened to hold more. Certain plants and fungi appear almost overnight after sustained rain, and insects that were driven underground resurface in huge numbers, creating a short-term food surplus for anyone who understood the pattern. The groups who knew this wasn't just an ending to survive, it was a resource to exploit, had a real advantage over the ones who only saw 7 wasted days. So what did ancient humans actually do during a week of non-stop rain? Everything that mattered, and almost none of it looked like survival. They rationed the fire, they stretched the food, they gave every person a task and turned confinement into production. Needles, cordage, tools, bedding, they carried flame into total darkness and painted animals from memory. They sat by a fire for 7 straight nights and told each other everything they knew and everything they believed until it became permanent. A week of rain should have been 7 days lost. Instead, it became the incubator for almost everything that separates a surviving group from a thriving one. Because when you can't go outside and your entire group's future depends on what gets made, said, and remembered inside that one dry space, boredom isn't an option, it's a resource. And for a week at a time, across tens of thousands of years, that resource is quietly one of the reasons we're still here.